Hello, everyone. So, we're going to begin our 2.7 lesson on Indigenous resistance and colonization. Right about now, you should have finished your do now, and let's get started. So, our essential question, and this is a question you're going to keep writing on the top of your notes where it says essential question. The question that we're exploring is how have Indigenous people been impacted by histories of colonization, right? Before the Europeans came and other parts of the Europeans arrived into these places, there were indigenous folks, and we want to know, well, when indigenous folks had their own way of living, they had a certain way of life, of living, um, of hunting, dressing. So when the Europeans arrived, what changes did they make? What was the impact? And that leads us to today's lesson about the Philippines. And perhaps many of us may or may not know about the Filipino history, but we're going to get into that. So, what do you know about the Philippines and its history? You should have done the do now. That should have given you a small head start. So, of course, we're going to get into colonialism, which is when one country invades and it takes control of another country and it claims it as its own land. Usually, it's always violent and it's done by force, and of course, it's without consent. Um, and I can say that can get pretty tricky because at the time, if you think about it, if you have these bunch of people who come into your land, they were probably very welcoming, but they were not expected to be ambushed, right? So an example is that Native Americans were colonized by European forces, the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English. If you remember the map that we looked at before this, right, you see where all of these colonizers arrived. Native peoples killed by European contact disease. So that was the impact. They were murdered, they were raped, they were forced to leave their lands, and they were forced to build foundations of the US. They were forced to create the new land, right? Like the missions, they were created to establish a way of living which enforced, Catholicism slash Christianity, right? So way of like thinking. So moving forward, um, our notes begin. Our central question is how has colonialism impacted indigenous people around the world, or for in this case, in the Philippines? So the Republic of the Philippines is a very tiny island, as you can see right over here. The bell ring. And it's an archipelago, which is a collection of islands. There's nearly 7,000 islands in this land. Excuse me. There's about 110 indigenous tribes, um, and 4,600 of the islands have been named, and 2,000 have been inhabited. Luzon, Visayas, Mindango, the three major island groups of the Philippines. These regions are divided for geographical purposes, but also have distinct characteristics, customs, languages, and for each group. So this is how it looks in the world map. The Philippines and colonialism. So we're going to go through this. So just write, as you're listening, just write what stood out to you. In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan arrives in Suluan Island. First Europeans to set foot on the Philippines shores. Battles of Mactan happens. We'll get into that. 1526, 1564, Spanish sent 8 unsuccessful expeditions to colonize the Philippines. In 1571, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi annexed, which means as the islands for Spain, establishing Manila as a colonial capital. In 1570s and the late 1800s, colonialism in the Philippines would be characterized by drastic changes in government and culture. So there was an impact. They came, they conquered, and if you notice, this is why we have so many Filipinos' last names are very similar to people who live in Latin America, because we were colonized by the Spanish. Yay. Just kidding. Okay. So here were the pre-colonial indigenous societies before, the Spanish came. As you can see, they were very spacious. A lot of these Filipino folks already had their own set of society, and they were able to write, which was called the Baybayin. Spanish recorded that majority of women could read or write. Education was taught orally in the form of poetry, ballads, songs, and dances. So if you make connections like of how Filipino culture is now, right? There's a lot of artistry in the Filipino culture. So perhaps that's where it comes from, like from the long historical track of Filipinos, of indigenous Filipinos. Here we have what we call a barangay, and these were pre-colonial indigenous social structures. So this is how they lived. It was a village. They were very small. They were based on kinship, meaning it's all very communal. It had a datu or a chief. And then these small colonies or barangays, there's about 10 to 30 houses and about 150 to 100 families lived. Post-colonial, as if you fast forward to nowadays, this is how it looks. Very similar to, maybe villages in Mexico, if you've never been. It was like a pueblo. Pre-colonial barangays were probably like a pueblo. Post-colonial now is like what you see if you were to go somewhere modern. Here's what we see, a primary source. This is an image. It's a legal document where they used to write, Filipino folks used to write on copper plates. And in this plate, someone wrote the debt of a local is paid. This was the earliest known calendar dated document found in the Philippines. So this is very, I guess, recent and historical, because when we find things like this, it just shows you the richness in indigenous history that we're not really told, because a lot of it was burned. Indigenous habitants of the Philippines had significant contact with the rest of Southern Asia. So if you think about it, there was already, before the Europeans came, there was already some type of connection with Asia and the Philippines. And back then there were no like motorboats, there was no Instagram, no Facebook. So they made contact. How did they make it? Well, we don't have enough. I'm sure there's resources for you to find out there how they made contact, but this can tell you how they could have. And then finally, let me change this up so you can see what I had before. Religion and spirituality. Before influence of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism were introduced to the islands due to trade. Indigenous communities observe animism as a major belief system, and that is that the world is inhabited by spirits, including natural phenomena like volcanoes, mountains, and waterfalls. So there was a connection to the earth, there was a connection to their world, right? And we can probably see that in today's Filipino modern culture. And that leads to the question, how does animist beliefs plays a role in today's modern time or in your life? That is something for you to think about. Pre-colonial shamans were known as baybalan. Traditional shaman healer, it was usually a female, so that tells you the role that that gender played. There's a spiritual leader. They held high positions in authority, charged with maintaining traditional values and systems and worldviews, and they were specialized in communicating, appeasing, and connecting to the spirits, and the spirits that were in nature. So as you can see, before colonialism, we call it pre-colonialism, the history of the Philippine indigenous was very rich. They had a society. It was strong, and it was definitely fluid. So what you're going to do, you are now going to you're going to research, looking at these slides. You're going to take notes from each tribes There's about 3. There's the Igorot tribes from the northern Philippines. You're going to do some research on the Ifugao tribes. And then you're going to look into the Luma tribe. So those are 3 in total that you're going to research on your own. That way you don't hear me talking. And then after that, I will make another video for part 2, which is the battle of the first resistance of the Philippines towards colonialism. Okay, everybody? Have a good rest of your day. Bye.